You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
Hurricane Ian was one of the most devastating hurricanes to ever hit the United States, and it obviously had an effect on our industry. That's what we're going to talk about today with our guest, Ned Bowman, Executive Director of the Florida Petroleum Marketers Association. So welcome to the show,
Thanks,
Ned.
Jeff. Thanks for having me.
So before we dive in and talk about what happened with a hurricane and how you prepared, can you, for those who aren't familiar with state associations, can you give them an overview of what your association does?
We lobby. We put education programs on for our members. We do a big trade show, expo, and we're there to advocate on behalf of the industry and support our members in any way we can.
So short version of that is you are NACS on a Florida level. And in Florida, of course, it's a big state. You have more than 21 million people. There are 9,400 convenience stores, which is number 3 of all states. And you have a lot of hurricanes. And unfortunately, the way these hurricanes hit Florida, they go from the bottom to the top, usually on some level, which force people out, which require convenience stores to have to be the last to stay open, the first to reopen, not to mention they're in harm's way in terms of all these hurricanes. So want to start off, Ned, by just take us through. You have a lot of practice in this, unfortunately. What is the process when you find out there's a tropical wave, a tropical storm, something building that could impact Florida? What does all that process look like?
So the process starts with a phone call from ESF 19, Logan Patton. And he's inside the Emergency Operations Center, and he'll let me know when they're going to activate. This particular storm, they activated on September 24th. I activated on September 25th at 7 a.m. I was in the Emergency Operations Center. And then what happens is you start working on different plans for fuel. You look at the forecast track of where this storm is going to go into. And it's just a process of getting ready for where they think this is going to be. And everybody is going along and trying to figure out where this thing's going to go and what you got to do. We started calls with our industry on Thursday, September 22nd. We knew that there was a possibility of a storm coming, not that it was going to be definite and they were going to react, but we wanted to get people aware, hey, there may be a storm coming. We want to get information out there. So we were able to get our members on the phone. What do they need? What are they looking at? Checking on the fuel supply, and just to make them aware of this is a possibility.
And along with that, you're in touch with well, first off, this bunker that you're in is in Tallahassee, and it's something like 40 feet underground, and you have it all set up there with other folks that are important to this to preparedness. So it is people from the government, it is people from, I assume, meteorology and all these other elements, and they have one focus. How do you move people safely out of the way, and how do you return them as safely as possible? If that's an oversimplification.
Yeah, no, it is. It's they're actually going to build a new one, but I would look at it as like Mission Control in Houston. It's got big screens. Everybody's in a room. Everybody's communicating with everybody. You've got National Guard. You've got the electric companies are there, Florida Highway Patrol, the Sheriff's Department, the local authorities, business and industry, meteorology, as you'd mentioned, DOT. We work very closely with them. You've got a media area. You've got Volunteer Florida, and then you have a whole National Guard wing, and then you also have an energy, which is now ESF 19, which is a fuel side, and they're there in force also.
And there are a variety of things that you go over. And I remember on one of these phone calls a few years ago, you're looking at things like, are there Jones Act barges that can come into Florida? Can you get police escorts to have trucks go down the wrong way in highways? Could they get police escorts to deliver fuel? All these things to deal with a fairly narrow, long state in getting fuel supply down and getting it back while you have 21 million people possibly in harm's way going the other direction.
The biggest issue we had with this storm was the track. Meteorology said this track has no steering currents. We don't know. Usually by now we know there's a definite path. So the path that 9 out of the 10 showed was it was going to go into the Tampa Pinellas area, which would have been devastating. Tampa has about 40 to 46% of the fuel that comes into the state comes through that port. So we were developing plans of bringing fuel in for the reentry from other states because the idea was that we were going to lose Tampa's port. So that's the planning that goes on. You're trying to do all these contingency plans. So you need truckers. You need to know who can take the fuel. Who needs generators. If you have a transfer switch, the state will offer you to use a generator based upon availability and need. And so you start developing all these plans. Well, you also had the tax holiday, which was going to start October 1st. Well, some of the members are trying to manage their inventory for that date. So that was another issue that we ran into. So now you start going through these processes, and then at the last minute, the storm decides, it's going to go into the Naples-Fort Myers area. And now you're trying to shift assets and trying to figure out, okay, what changes? So now we're evacuating Captiva, and we're evacuating Naples, we're evacuating Fort Myers Beach and Sanibel. So that changes the whole dynamics. Now you're trying to find out what you have for generators and capacity down there for the reopening and for emergency responders. So, everything changes minute by minute on the planning on what you have to do. And like I said earlier, each storm is different. Matthew is different than Michael, which was different than Sally, which was different than Irma, and now we have Ian.
And you're communicating on 3 different levels. You're communicating to get these waivers, whether it's for reformulated fuel, hours of operation, all things like that. You're trying to get waivers to make the system work better. You're also communicating to your members to tell them what they need to know, how they can stay in business or how they can get out of harm's way if they are in the path. And then you're also talking to the media and Google Ned Bowman. You will see he is regularly quoted because he is aware of all the things that people care about, which is getting out of town and having enough fuel to do so. So how do you triage those 3 types of communications that you need to do?
You basically just manage the process. So we would do an industry call nationwide with NACS was on it, EMA and Sigma at 1 o'clock every day. And we had weather forecasters. So we had meteorology. It was led by Logan Patton from ESF 19. And so we had API on there. We had the electrical people on there. And we had the governance staff listening in. And what we ask the members, what do you need? What are your needs? What are the critical things that you need right now? One of the things that came up is we needed a waiver to sell dyed diesel fuel for on-road for emergency vehicles. So that would take the strain off of the clear diesel for regular consumers. So you start looking at, what are the needs? Racetrack wanted, what was the availability of generators for down in the Fort Myers, Naples area so that they could open up their stores. So you start looking and talking to the state and see what their capacities are of what we need. You need to know what the lines are at the terminals. How long are they? Are companies going on allocation that are critical needs to different areas? So down in Lee County and Collier County, if you're on allocation and we needed fuel down there, the governor's request was, hey, you have to leave those allocations and you have to help these people out to get fuel into the areas that it's needed. So that's what you run into. We also got an RVP waiver for the reformulated gasoline for the vapor because that was changing over. So we did that for some of our members. We were in contact with Loves and with Pilot, with their members. What were their needs? So it was the whole industry comes together, and it's pretty interesting how everybody helps everybody out when it's a critical need like that.
To a certain extent, it's a simplicity that makes something very complex, something that you can adapt to by having a simple set of things. What do you need? How do we get it? What's next? How do we communicate that? Approximating some of the things that you said makes it much easier when a storm decides to not hit Tampa and to hit Fort Myers instead, because it's the same process. Now, for those who the storm surge was horrific, and everybody's seen things on either social media or the news about how bad the storm surge was. And I know Tampa has always been seen as the nightmare scenario for storm surge. That, Clearwater, et cetera, among other reasons, it's very shallow. If you've ever gone on vacation, you can go out 100 yards before you're up to your neck. So the surge is that much worse in those areas. Once it hit, what is the process that you go through, Ned, in continuing to communicate to members as it changes from preparation to getting back to operations once the storm passes, if it's okay to get back to operations? So how does that change over?
It's once the storm passes, it's health, safety, and welfare of your employees to make sure that they're okay and to make sure the members are okay. And then you start finding out what the needs are. So the people where the areas got hit, for example, there was a 7-Eleven station that Terry Hutchinson has in downtown Naples. After the storm passed, he was open with a generator. So now you have an asset there. So now do you need fuel? What's the asset that you need if you need help at all? Then you start looking at the flooding. This storm had enough rain where we had several areas of the state which had a 500-year flood area. One of them was Arcadia. So once the storm passes, you start finding out what are the needs, what do you need, what areas are really hit, and how to drive fuel into it, because everybody's looking for fuel for generators. So that's what you get into that recovery mode is, okay, so how do you recover from this? How much damage did you have? What assets did you have open? And you go basically just start listening to the members. And again, we do those phone calls every day at 1:00. And we take the notes and we say, okay, we'll get back to you. Okay, that's the need you need. Okay, let's see what's available. And then we're being asked by the governor and his staff, what's the situation on the private sector on fuel? So you start working through that. And then after about 8 days, I left the EOC and I drove down to Arcadia to find out exactly what was open, what needed. So I got information about Circle K stores that were there, the Citgo stations. We had a Marathon station down there, so we're having difficulty getting fuel into that area. So the allocations got lifted for the Marathon station. They were able to get flushed. I went to Fort Myers the next day down at the beach. Racetrack was open. They were about 3 miles from the beach, and they were very busy. The 7-Eleven store that was down another mile had the Southeast manager was there, and I was talking to him, and he had ankle-deep water in the store. They were cleaning it up, and they were going to try to get open. They had a generator running. But in the middle of the parking lot, they had a boat. So you figure out the ankle-deep, how much water must have just got into the store, but what was on the street. That boat had to come 2 miles up the road. So, you start looking at all the different scenarios that happened during a hurricane. We were able to get 10 generators for Racetrack, which helped them open. They had fuel. We didn't have any issues with that. We had other stations, Sunshine Distributing got their stations up and running. So we had pockets that were key. People say, well, you had 50% of the stations that were out of fuel. Yes, but we had 50% of the stations that were open and was selling fuel. So the biggest word that we have during a storm on recovery is patience. If everybody has some patience, you can get through the gasoline issues and a lot of the other issues that you have.
A lot of times on the news, you'll hear things like, oh, well, somebody's charging X cents more per gallon. It must be they're doing something, taking advantage of the situation. And of course, there is so much going on behind the scenes to stay open, to get fuel, to have people that are working there that are worried about their own homes and they're showing up for work. Do you have any stories or any anecdotes that just people need to hear more of these things, how behind the scenes there was incredible acts going on with our industry in terms of how they always respond, even though you don't necessarily hear those stories.
Yeah, 75% of the convenience stores in the state of Florida are mom and pops. So that means they're owned by independent operators. And they work inside your town. And our motto has always been neighbors serving neighbors. They're not out there, raising the prices, jacking them up. The fuel and gasoline is a commodity. We also have surcharges that get put on by the transporters. The transporter waits in line 3 hours at the terminal because everybody's at the terminal trying to get fuel. Well, he's going to charge you a surcharge. Well, that's got to be added on to the cost of the gasoline. Our members are really not interested in price gouging people. They're interested in serving their communities. And yeah, you get a lot of phone calls. I mean, if you have a station across the street and they're closed and their price is at one thing and you're open and you're going along and your price is up 10 cents, people think you're price gouging. Well, no, and the other alternative is that people that were across the street made the decision, rightfully so, to evacuate. Or their house got damaged and they couldn't go to work and they had to stay home and do that. I mean, we had Hurricane Michael came through, and Steve Sangre up in Marietta, Florida, he had to go live with his daughter. Now, his daughter had a tree that it fell on the house. Steve had a tree that came through his living room. So it was his daughter's house, as sad as it sounds, was in better shape than his house. But he made deliveries, and he kept the stations open. So that's some of the things that our members go through. I mean, they're part of the community, and their homes get damaged and flooded. Terry Hutchinson, I used to have as an example down in Naples. He had the station that was down on Fort Myers Beach. It's gone. But yet he had the tenacity to stay open at the station in Naples to help the community.
So the TV cameras have left. Maybe there's less attention paid than there was just even a few days ago. What's going on now, and what do people need to know about what Hurricane Ian did to Florida and did to our industry?
It's similar to what went on in Mexico Beach. It's going to be a decade before you get rebuilt. We had a member, Jared Howell's grandmother had a place on Fort Myers Beach. She's had it 70 years. It's gone. So now in order to rebuild that, it's going to have to be about 17 feet in the air for the storm surges and for the high tides. So, it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. 85% of the homes that got damaged didn't have flood insurance. So, now that people are trying to get back to normal, they're trying to get the mold and get the houses and the debris. So, you look at the fuel side of it and you look at the debris companies, they bring their own fuel. The National Guard brings their own fuel. Each entity brings their own fuel. Florida Power and Light brings their own fuel. Duke Energy brings their own fuel. So our members in other areas of the area are bringing fuel to them for the first responders. So it's an operation, and I give credit to the state of Florida and to the director now, Kevin Guthrie. It's a well-oiled machine. There's really nothing that they've seen that's out of the ordinary. In the recovery, the press is gone, and the people still suffer. And you're right, Jeff. There were some videos that are out there. 18-foot storm surge. It's sad watching the houses float down the street. But the center of the community are the convenience stores, and they will be open, and they'll be serving the community again.
And that's really important. I know that a couple of years ago, we worked with a group that was involved in disaster relief. And this one guy came up with the Waffle House Index. And that was related to if an area is going to face something significant, the Waffle Houses would close. And they would know by how many Waffle Houses would close whether or not that was going to be an area that was going to be dramatically impacted. And he told us, this is Craig Fugate with formerly from FEMA, and he said, you really need a C-store index because they are the ones that you need to monitor because they are the last ones to close and they are the first ones that open, and they are also the first ones that permanently open and start making communities feel whole again when everything around them feels very, very incomplete.
Yep. Well, one of I go back to Howell Oil. You don't think about the nurses and doctors that, are on call or have to be at the hospitals. And what he's done with the local hospitals down in that area is he's dropped fuel pods at the hospitals and emergency room operations so that the doctors and nurses can get fuel and it's paid for by the hospitals. So that way they're not putting pressure on the system itself. So there's a lot of different things that come out of each hurricane and different ideas that get implemented.
So are any of these ideas transferable? I know not every state faces hurricanes, but are there any takeaways for retailers or anyone in terms of how do you plan for disasters and how do you recover from disasters? Unfortunately, you've had a lot of experience with it, but a couple takeaways that somebody may say, okay, I need to start thinking this way for whatever might hit us.
I think you have to get as many people on the phone as possible. You have to communicate. You need to know what the ports are doing. You need to know what the assets of the police escorts are. You need to get your members on the phone that are affected areas, what their needs are. You need to weather people, so you need the state on the phone. So the more communication, the more people can get on the same issues and solve problems and help each other out. We had Handy Foods down in the center part of the state, and their transporter just couldn't keep up with the demand. And one of our members said, hey, I got spare capacity. And he started hauling gasoline for them. So everybody ties together. But as long as you communicate and people understand what the issues are, it really works out well, Jeff. And that's probably the biggest takeaway is if you have an issue, you have spare capacity, tell somebody, ask them. And you get it done. I mean, we had issues. You have the pipeline from Taft that runs up in Orlando that runs down from Tampa. Well, you have to energize that, and it's got to be energized on two ends. So you've got TECO, Tampa Electric Co-op, and on the port side, and up at the terminal is Florida Power and Light. So that all has to be coordinated to make sure that gets turned on at the right time, and to make sure that the tank is full in Tampa to energize that line. So there's a lot of takeaways on what you can do and learn. When the Colonial Pipeline went down, you learn from that process. You just learn from other areas. I learned from Paul Harden over in Texas with Scott Fisher on when the storms hit Houston on the flood. Mm-hmm. Now, we had the flooding here where they closed 75 for 12, 14 hours. So all that traffic had to get diverted out. And I turned to the DOT secretary was there, and I just made a statement to him, and I says, can you imagine if we were trying to evacuate electric vehicles and 75 had closed? How do you get those cars turned around? And how far can you come all the way around for 4 hours to get them around? Those are some of the thought processes that you're going to go through in the next couple of years. And I really don't see how right now electric vehicles are going to play a part of an evacuation in the state of Florida.
Yeah, it's really tough when you don't have the same number of nozzles and the length of time to get a sufficient fill is dramatically higher. And add to that, when people are in a panicked mode, they may not be as neighborly as otherwise. And to have all of that combined can put some real stress on everybody and the system.
Our CFO, Jimmy Petroleum, posted something that he showed with one of the Tesla cars catching on fire because it had flooded.
And all the batteries just kind of went off.
So there's real issues. I learned a lot. Each hurricane, like I said, is different. We pray for the people that lost their lives and the people that stayed. And, people say they have hurricane parties and they want to ride their hurricane out. And then after it goes through, they count their blessings. And they say, I should never, ever stay. I'll never stay again. It's an intense time. It takes real leadership from the state. And we're blessed, like I said, with Kevin Guthrie and what he does, the director, and his whole team and his whole staff. That's what they train for. And they are the best in the country.
And likewise, Ned, we are blessed and you are the best at your job. We appreciate what you do for all these events. And I know I've talked to you over the years. It's incredible. how much needs to be done in all these situations and how you need to do this with a calm approach and just think all the time. So thank you for sharing with us today, Ned. And we won't stop thinking about Florida, because even though the cameras have gone away, there's still a need there to rebuild. And as you said, it's going to take a while.
Yes, I appreciate it, Jeff. Thanks for having me. And thanks for all that NACS and this whole industry does for the communities.
Thank you all for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.